During my time as lecturer in St. John's Mayor, Seminary, Hyderabad, India, I held various functions, among them to be a spiritual guide to many students. One Catholic student from Kerala, whom I will call Samuel, confided a problem. I still see Samuel sprawling awkwardly in an armchair facing me. Tall, light-tanned complexion, 18 years old, nervously wiping his shining black hair aside as he threw anxious glances at me. "Tell me," I said. "I'm getting white stuff from my front," he said, pointing at a spot between his thighs. He waited, still looking at me. "So? It's like curdled milk." He waited again, then spurted out. "I told my neighbor. He says I've committed a serious sin. Against chastity." I grew up in the Midwest. We're famous for a lot of things. A lot of presidents were born here, lots of open fields and peaceful towns. We're also kind of famous for our churches. Throw a stone in any direction out here and you'll probably hit one of those steeples. All denominations, every state. If you've seen my sexual journey, you know that I was raised Catholic. I mean, my parents aren't like die-hard religious, but we went to church every Sunday, went to a Catholic school, the works. When it came to the topic of sex and sexual expression, we didn't have much. We were taught that even thinking about sex was a sin. The act of intercourse was a necessary evil, perpetuated by the original sin, when the first woman, Eve, ate an apple she wasn't supposed to. Typing out the lore of the Catholic Church, I wouldn't blame any non-Catholics for thinking we were crazy. Now, I want to be very clear at the top of this video. I might be a relapsed, non-practicing Catholic young person, but I have close friends who are still very religious, and it's taught me to respect other people's beliefs. As far as the Catholic Church is concerned, I fully believe it's a great way to receive guidance in your life, and it's generally a welcome community on account of most laymen not taking it too seriously. Most Catholics that I've met emphasize being a good person rather than following doctrine to the letter, which is a pretty cool way of approaching organized religion if you ask me. But we're getting off track here. This video isn't a full breakdown of Catholicism. Rather, I'd like to focus on one aspect: sexuality. Ooh, big surprise, Corretta/Candles wants to talk about sex. In my opinion, sex isn't a necessary evil. You know, it's just a fun thing we get to do, and you should view it as a skill you can develop. Like any other artistic expression, every person is born with a different set of tools, and it's up to you to find out how to use them, or not use them. You know, asexuality is a part of this too. But for those of us who do, it's not something to be ashamed of, and it's not a goal to attain. Some people view it as an emotionally special skill that you should only practice with one committed partner. Others view it as a more casual hobby. They're generally open to doing it with a wider range of individuals. I happen to be a part of the former group, but I'm good friends with people who tend to sleep around a bit more. Basically, other people engage with sex differently, and I have no problem with that. Just because I have the preference of emotionally reserved and less frequent sex doesn't mean I need to push that preference on others. But the church doesn't exactly feel the same way. Catholic doctrine states that marriage is between one married man and one married woman. Unless you're a priest, in which case you can't be married. A little criticism here. If marriage is a gift, why can our holiest members not participate? Because we don't want anyone else to get between them and God? How can they preach the beauty of marriage if they're not allowed to experience it? The church forces its members to repress their sexual urges because they believe it's an evil, only to be used for procreation when absolutely necessary. I think? I guess it's important to read the specific doctrine to know exactly what we're working with here. He says I've committed a serious sin against chastity. For a moment, I was stunned. Where should I start? Samuel wasn't the only one to reveal abysmal ignorance about sex and utter confusion about sexual morality. Anyone who knows the Catholic Church will have recognized that what I have been narrating regarding the Catholic community in Kerala applies equally to traditional Catholic communities anywhere in the world. Fear of sex and the attempt to repress it are, regretfully, international Catholic phenomena. Catholics in Kerala are not more beset by the sexual muddle than Catholics elsewhere. The problem does not lie in a country or its culture, but in traditional Catholicism. In his address to a group of U.S. bishops in September 1983, St. Pope John Paul II gives a statement on sexuality and premarital intercourse. In order to avoid any trivialization or desecration of sexuality, we must teach that sexuality transcends the purely biological sphere and concerns the innermost being of the human person as such. Sexual love is truly human only if it is an integral part of the love by which a man and a woman commit themselves totally to one another until death. This self-giving is only possible in marriage. This teaching must be the basis of all education in sexuality and chastity. It must be communicated to parents who have the primary responsibility for the education of their children, and also to pastors and religious teachers who collaborate with parents in the fulfillment of their responsibility. This approach lays the groundwork for what was my Catholic experience. Not only should the priest teach this dogmatic view of sex, but the teacher and the parent as well. Everyone in the faith must align with this statement. But there's more here. Consequently, masturbation is a sin against the sixth commandment because it violates the God-inscribed unbreakable bond between the love-giving and life-giving aspects of the marital act. Instead of the intimate and mutual self-giving that is the hallmark of the marital act, masturbation, and whether within marriage or outside of marriage, is an act in which one turns selfishly inward. According to the Church, masturbation is a moral sin if you consciously choose to do it, because it's seen as selfish, one-sided sex. It's sex, but you only care about your pleasure. I don't even disagree with the idea that teaching selfish sex is bad sex, because that is something we often forget. It's a two-way street, and asking what your partner wants is just as important as communicating what you want. But I disagree with masturbation as a whole being a sin, as it rests on the assumption that all masturbatory practices are inherently selfish. What about mutual masturbation? Doesn't seem very selfish to me. And, not all masturbation fantasies involve a man fantasizing about a woman he knows. It's a lot broader than that. Sex can be voyeuristic. You might not be involved in the fantasy at all. The point is, as someone who masturbates, I can say with absolute certainty that it isn't inherently selfish, and is normally done to relieve tension. Now, that being said, I actually do really vibe with the idea that sex isn't just a biological drive. It's something spiritual. Not everyone chooses to view sex this way, and I have no problem with that. But for me, there is a side to it that is special, and kind of spiritual. It's a person at their most vulnerable. A person's sexuality is like an unfinished painting. By engaging with it, you can experience their insecurities, their past experiences, their strengths, and their weaknesses. I would actually agree with the Catholic Church that sex isn't merely a carnal pleasure. It should be held to some high regard and practiced carefully. Any approach to sex that works for you is the right approach as long as you do it carefully. You're engaging with someone else, and there should be a verbal conversation about whether or not you're confident enough to not use protection. Because, realistically, I think a lot of people don't, and whether or not you've been tested for STIs. But what about homosexuality? Isn't the whole thing about the Catholic Church is that they hate gay people? Semi-recently, Pope Francis spoke on the mistreatment of homosexuals in the Church. Francis acknowledged that Catholic bishops in some parts of the world support laws that criminalize homosexuality or discriminate against the LGBTQ community. And he himself referred to the issue in terms of sin. But he attributed such attitudes to cultural backgrounds, and said bishops in particular need to undergo a process of change to recognize the duty of everyone. The United Nations has repeatedly called for an end to laws criminalizing homosexuality outright. saying that they violate rights to privacy and freedom from discrimination, and are a breach of countries' obligations under international law to protect the human rights of all people, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Declaring such laws unjust, Francis said the Catholic Church can and should work to put an end to them. Being a homosexual is not a crime, but it is a sin, he said. First, let's distinguish between a sin and a crime. It's also a sin to lack charity with one another, he added. Catholic teaching holds that while gay people must be treated with respect, homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. Francis has not changed that teaching, but he has made reaching out to the LGBTQ community a hallmark of his papacy. So basically, we've got a pope who's a little more chill about it than past popes have been, and is even calling for the church to protect the pride community. But the pope will never speak out against Catholic doctrine, so don't expect the church to start supporting gay marriage anytime soon. Most lay people in the church aren't homophobic. Be whoever you want to be. The church won't hold or recognize a gay marriage, but that's about as far as the hate goes. It is still a problem that a lot of the church's gay followers will run into, and it's sad this hasn't changed. The fact is that one of the reasons I left the church and stopped following the church religiously is because if I'm taught something that doesn't make sense, I'm going to question its legitimacy. From my point of view, the Catholic Church's unwillingness to fully accept its homosexual members is based on a misinterpreted doctrine. You know, maybe there's some old doctrine that says between a man and a woman, but respectfully, I also think God planned for society to change because God knows everything, and trusted us to recognize that line as a product of the laws of the time, and that once we'd adjusted society to get rid of those laws, then we would become more connected and accepting of all relationships. But I digress. I'm not a priest. This is just what I believe. My mother came from a family of 9 children. None of these children received any sex education. They were warned again and again that indulging in sex was sinful, a mortal sin, but sex itself was not explained. Sex was haunted by fear and hidden darkness. My mother once told me that as the oldest child in the family, she accompanied her mother, my grandmother, to a conference in the parish church. Preacher was renowned Father Henry de Grieve. He preached for an hour, my mother said. Thumping his fist on the pulpit, he roared, "The world wants sex. Dirty sex. But I warn you, sex will drag you to hell. Everlasting hell." The Catholic Church's numbers have been on a bit of a decline. Everyone knows this. Today, 20% of US adults describe themselves as Catholics. This percentage has been generally stable since 2014, but it is slightly lower than in 2007, when 24% of US adults identified as Catholic. This number has generally been on the decline with every subsequent decade. There are many factors you can point to, but one reason is the fact that the world has become more connected, and the need for the church as the basis for every community has been eliminated. People are more aware of what's going on outside their community. People back then were taught that what's unknown is evil and can't be trusted. But since then, we've come to understand the unknown, and it's caused a lot of us to reflect on what the purpose of the church really is. It's also a fact that the Catholic Church specifically has a lot of members that are misaligned with the clergy. While the Catholic Church opposes abortion, 59% of Catholics say abortion should be legal. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. A lot of church members will listen to the homily, they'll understand it, but they won't absorb it, because most of the time, it's 90% outdated beliefs. Most members have already made up their own minds on what they believe and what they don't. The church's greatest weakness, but also its greatest strength. It allows the church to survive in a world where people can more easily find the right answers to what's unknown, including the topic of sex. Back then, sex, and especially homosexual sex, was probably seen as evil because it caused disease. They didn't have our modern methods of protection. They didn't have an understanding of what diseases even were. To them, A disease was a punishment administered by an angry God. But if I want to criticize the church's specific beliefs, I should do my homework and figure out where this doctrine came from. So where exactly in the Bible does it say that sex is a necessary evil, an inherently sinful act? Nowhere in the Bible does it say that sex is sinful. Yep, this is actually the sole revelation that motivated me to make this entire video. As a kid, it was just pounded into our heads. Evil, evil, evil. For a religion so dependent on one book to drive the entirety of its actions, it's odd that we hold this belief that isn't present in the book at all. So where did this belief even come from? The main engineer of Catholic disgust with sex proved to be St. Augustine, who lived in North Africa from 354 to 430. His influence on later centuries is truly enormous. Quotes from his more than 100 writings dominate medieval theology. Augustine is the church father most admired, revered, and studied till present day. Doctor of the Church Augustine teaches that original sin is passed on by sexual passion in the parents. He tells Christian parents that the physical expression of a loving relationship in marriage can only be excused by the need of producing children. Sex is tainted with sin. Though sex is necessary to have children and so unavoidable, there is something disgusting about sex. A good Christian man knows this. He loves in his wife what is spiritual, but he hates in her what makes her a woman, her mortal sexual flesh. It's definitely an extreme view that really demoralizes women specifically. But why does he believe this? Well, it's unfortunately a tale as old as time. You know, those with traumatic sexual experiences tend to carry those mental burdens with them forever. At 17, Augustine entered a long-term relationship with a mistress, whom he had a son with, who died as a teenager himself. This experience contributed to his negative view of sexual matters. He believed that human beings were cursed with an inability to control their passions. Despite this, he concluded that sex itself was not evil, but enjoyed outside of marriage, it must be. He takes his specific, deeply unfortunate experience and imposes it on the rest of the church. But he did say that sex itself was not evil. Later clergymen would interpret his words a bit differently, and now, we have a modern-day church passing on one man's unresolved sexual issues. And this is why, as a relapsed Catholic, I don't understand why we continue to teach this doctrine. Or, rather, the lack thereof, since there is no doctrine. Just the misinterpreted words of one fallible man. As a church, I think we seriously need to reevaluate our beliefs on this thing specifically. But you've already heard my story. It's important to promote a wide range of experiences to determine what's best for the future. So how do others feel about this issue? Throughout college, I was your average Catholic girl who drifted away from the church. Not completely, but enough that I didn't feel too guilty about partying, binge drinking, and sloppy random makeouts. When I was a senior, I confided in my roommates, telling them that I had never orgasmed. They laughed and could hardly believe it. Masturbation was so natural to them, healthy even. They gave me a few tips and told me to have some fun. So I did. I felt a little bit of shame after masturbating, but mostly I felt empowered. I'm sexually liberated, I thought. I felt like I was stepping out of a dark, oppressive cave and into the light. I even remember feeling smug towards my Catholic friends, thinking, "You have no idea what you're missing." Once I learned the magnificent power of the clitoris, I began to masturbate regularly. Still, I prided myself on keeping my habit in check. I masturbated at most a few times a month. I never used pornography, though this is definitely a topic worth discussing. I occasionally fantasized about men, but that didn't feel problematic. I didn't think I was hurting anyone by just letting my imagination run a bit wild. And certainly, I assumed that masturbating was better than sleeping around. Masturbation became a form of self-love. I convinced myself that rejecting masturbation was equivalent to not loving my body. After all, the general consensus is that the clitoris is purely a pleasure point, something to be enjoyed for its own sake. God designed our bodies and designed them with clitorises. Who are we to reject something that God made for our pleasure? After I got married, I continued to masturbate. I justified it by fantasizing less and instead focusing on the physical sensation of stimulation. It's just about a physical release. It's a healthy and natural thing to do, I told myself. It wasn't about lusting after a person. As I grew in my faith, I learned that the Catholic Church describes masturbation as an intrinsically and gravely disordered action. The word intrinsically implies that the act itself is problematic, regardless of one's intent. This church teaching just didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand how something that felt so natural and seemed harmless could be wrong. Still, I vowed to take a look at my motives and evaluate whether masturbation was purely physical for me. Once I realized that lust and selfishness drove me to masturbation, I couldn't do it with a confident, clear conscience anymore. I stopped masturbating abruptly, relegating my vibrator to the back of my nightstand drawer. Now, I feel empowered when I abstain, even though I used to find abstaining to be oppressive. It's empowering to know that I can resist temptation. It's empowering to deny myself something that feels good. It's empowering to rest in the fullness of my sexuality in healthy ways, rather than through acts that feed my lustful desires. Abstaining from masturbation has also given me a new outlook on what healthy marital sex can and should look like. Sex is meant to be a beautiful expression of love for your spouse. Yet when I masturbated frequently, I didn't desire sex as much with my husband. Sex often became a chore, with me reluctantly agreeing to sex but telling him to keep it quick and just focus on getting your orgasm. I don't need one. I often looked forward to masturbating more than having sex with my husband. Now, I view intimacy with my husband as the gift that it is, and I strive to give my whole self to him during sex. I admit I'm a work in progress. I still struggle with temptation, and I've given in once since I made the decision to abstain. But as I continue to see the fruits of abstaining, each day becomes a little easier. Can masturbation be boiled down to a harmless expression of self-love and body positivity? Not for me. Simply put, I don't think I can be the woman God intends me to be while maintaining the habit of masturbation. Now, what I love about this testimony is how honest she is about where her mind is at. She's gone through a full character arc of rejecting sexuality, going too deep in the sauce, and then adjusting to a more central set of beliefs. To her, sex isn't evil at all, but letting her desires run wild wasn't healthy for her marriage. She doesn't try to convince you that you need to have her exact view of sex to be happy. This is just what works for her. And you need to find what works for you. Some people have the ability to watch porn and masturbate and not have it affect their marriage. But not everyone. Whatever works for you. This is the kind of mindset we should be approaching sexuality with in the church. You can try different ways of expressing yourself, but you need to do the work to figure out which way is right for you. Whatever way allows you to be a good, healthy person, you should just do that. And the church should bring in speakers from all walks of life. People who use God's gift to its fullest extent instead of being scared of it, or viewing it as a goal to be achieved. A lot of young men have this narrow view of sex as something they need to get, instead of something they share with somebody else. Something that's allowed to develop over time, and can be enjoyed fully when you're mature enough to understand it. One of my aunts, Caroline, 2 years younger than my mother, only found out during her wedding night what intercourse means. It was a drama, my mother said. Caroline was shocked, sickened, disgusted. She cried the whole night. The marriage was scarred for the rest of her life. Keeping children ignorant is a recipe for disaster. The problem with Augustine's view of sex is his objectification of women. He loves in his wife what is spiritual, but he hates in her what makes her a woman. Her mortal, sexual flesh. He's laying the groundwork for a view of sex that is one-sided. The man is disgusted by her sexual pleasure, and they should only copulate in a mechanical sense. This is what leads young men to have this perceived dominance over women. And I'm not even talking about this in a social justice capacity, just in a way that leads to a lot of domestic abuse. Sex is a two-way street. otherwise, that relationship is built on unhealthy and immoral ground. Groping, assault, teaching us that women are objects who don't have an equal say in sexual matters, whose bodies are created to birth children and nothing else. Why are we listening to this guy again? Not only are men being taught dominance over a woman's body, but women are being taught that their sexuality is to be disregarded. While in the past, I may have used sex with men to make me feel better about myself, these days I know that in order to make love, rather than have sex, I need to start off feeling good about myself. I need to love myself first and feel the sacredness that my body was born with before I can truly offer my love to another. This is not something that I was taught by the Catholic Church. My experience of the Catholic Church was that the teachings made all women feel unworthy, like second-class citizens, fit only for being a dutiful wife and mother, and exclusively defined by their relationship to a man and their babies. The sexual repression evident in many institutionalized religions, including the Catholic Church, is carefully crafted and can pass on through several generations if not caught and turned around. We women need to reclaim our bodies for ourselves, and then what we can offer our partner is a woman in her fullness, tender, precious, and full of love. What I just read are the words of another woman who became disillusioned with the church. Now, she does finish with the line, "As a woman who doesn't want sex, but can be very sexy in her sacredness when she is truly making love." But keep in mind, this is a personal statement about herself. She's not saying it's not okay for a woman to want sex. She just chooses not to, herself. There's a joke about Catholic women being the freakiest in bed, and this is always due to the fact that Catholic women never get to express themselves fully in a sexual sense. So when they finally have the opportunity to, all of that tension is released at once. And yeah, sounds about right. Everyone should have the right to express that side of themselves. If we know anything for sure, it's that repressing it harms not only you, but potentially the people around you. What happens when a man represses these natural feelings? They're left to fester, and they can and will manifest themselves into something much worse. The church has been dealing with a rampant sexual abuse problem. More than 15 years after U.S. bishops pledged zero tolerance for sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests, reports of previously unpublicized misconduct continue to receive wide media coverage. A Pennsylvania grand jury last year uncovered decades of sexual abuse and cover-up by Catholic leaders. And Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, formerly the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., was forced to resign amid allegations that he sexually abused adults and minors. 27% of U.S. Catholics say they have scaled back mass attendance, and 26% have reduced the amount of money they donate to their parish in response to the recent reports of sexual abuse and misconduct. 1,670 persons belonging to the Catholic clergy who were accused of sexual abuse of minors were identified from their personnel files, corresponding to 4.4% of the clergy overall. It's something that continues to happen, and, from my point of view, the reason is obvious. It's the 60s. Young man feels feelings he can't explain. Maybe he's just feeling the effects of puberty, and he doesn't understand it. Maybe he likes boys instead of girls, and his dad is determined to beat it out of him. His dad sends him to the church, where he's trained to become a priest. His sexuality is buried under decades of behavioral correction. He becomes a priest to pass on these teachings. He's the leader of a church and a congregation. He serves alongside altar servers, young boys. Because his problems were forced down and never resolved, his urges grow in secret, and he isn't allowed to talk about them. When you can't express anything about yourself, those problems are allowed to grow inside you and warp into something worse, far beyond the point of therapy. Look, why is anyone surprised that so many clergymen are abusing young men specifically? A lot of them became priests in order to suppress their homosexuality, and once you add in a power dynamic, those powers get abused in the worst ways. I have no sympathy for these people, because they're rational adults who should have recognized there was a problem and taken care of it before it got to that point. But I think we should be placing a lot of blame on this oppressive system, because clearly, this way of thinking and teaching isn't working. There are consequences. Keeping children ignorant is a recipe for disaster. The octopus lies in hiding, unseen, till it kills with deadly ferocity. This stealthy strangler, I saw, was the perfect image for the insidious Catholic obsession with sex and hostility to sex. Hiding under clever guises of pious camouflage, the octopus of sexual repression wreaked havoc with its many strangling arms. It held teenagers in a state of terror of its unseen threat. It snuffed out the joy of sex in the bedrooms of Catholic couples. It doomed timid Catholics to avoid marriage altogether and drove more adventurous Catholics by rebound to explore incest, pornography, and other sexual excesses. Through these flawed ideas, Augustine greatly contributed to the stranglehold of the octopus on so many Catholic lives. When, through evolution, God created us, He made us sexual beings. That means we have sex organs, sexual feelings, sexual pleasures, and intercourse. There is nothing shameful or disgusting about them. Of course, we need to use our sexual powers responsibly, like any other gift we possess. But sex is good. Sex too is a gift, not evil or caused by sin. It is holy and good. The only way for the church to survive in the current day is to change its stance on things like sex and homosexuality. But the church will never change its doctrine, you say. True, but then it's a good thing that nowhere in church doctrine does it say that sex is evil. I say for that reason, this change is absolutely still on the table. So what does a sex-accepting society look like? What's my vision for a future church that rejects these ideas? In this society, masturbation falls under self-care. Men especially tend to have an overflow of sexual tension, and releasing it safely assures that it won't build and fester into something worse. The church recognizes sexuality as a gift, and encourages its members to use this gift. Yes, some people develop their sexuality at an uncomfortable age, and it's completely understandable why a parent or educator isn't exactly thrilled to have that conversation. Nevertheless, it's important to provide resources when those young people decide to explore that side of themselves, with an important clause that sex should only be enjoyed with another when you're at the age where your experience affords you greater responsibility. Until then, speakers will come in and speak to puberty-age adolescents, providing different, non-judgmental, and non-biased perspectives on the topic. They do not have to get into specifics, as long as they make it clear that not everyone will choose to express themselves in the same way, and that's okay. What's important is clear consent and communication, and if necessary, use of protection. As an adult, it's understood that sex is like alcohol. There is no shame because you understand that everyone has their own set of preferences and experiences. They understand that alcohol itself is not inherently bad. Some people like whiskey, others like beer. Some drink one type of drink, others like to mix it up and experiment. Drink what you want, and as often as you want, as long as you know your limit and you drink responsibly. Understand that an overindulgence without regard for your body can and will lead to disaster, potentially impairing your ability to drink in the future. Some people might avoid drinking altogether because it's just not for them. People who drink in secret and aren't responsible enough to control how they process it are in danger of developing dangerous habits that can ruin their life. It's important to provide resources where people can discover other types of alcohol, and where they can find emotional support should they need it. A typical conversation. I'm a man in his 20s. I'm walking and talking with my other male friend. He confides in me that his girlfriend has unrealistic expectations of him in the bedroom. She watches porn, but claims it doesn't have an effect on her. He's able to give me specific details about what she wants him to do, and I can respond with my own experiences without feeling embarrassed. Maybe I had my own pornography problems in the past, and I know how to talk to someone who's in denial of the effects it can have. I tell him they need to sit down and have a conversation about it, and I can even be there as a mediator if he wants me to. As someone who knows what she's feeling, I feel equipped to help my friend. I think if we all learned a healthier way to approach the topic of sex, a lot of societal problems would correct themselves. If sex isn't viewed as a goal for a man to achieve, and is instead taught as a healthy skill you can develop first with yourself through masturbation, then potentially with others, a lot of sexual repression and abuse would cease to occur. If women are taught that their bodies have value outside of pleasing a man, and that men and women are equal in relationships, a lot of body dysmorphia and a rush to lose one's virginity can also be avoided. I could go on for hours, listing off hypothetical scenarios. I think I've made my position on this topic quite clear. I believe in a future where everyone is able to discuss sexual matters openly, without the need for shame. But if everyone is expressing their sexuality openly, how will we catch predators? Well, the catalyst for the creation of these predatory behaviors is isolation, mixed with shame, with a touch of power dynamics thrown in. Because everyone is discussing their preferences openly, the isolation never takes place. Because people recognize that everyone views sex differently, shame is never created. And because men and women have equal value in sexual dynamics, a power dynamic is never established. I think a lot of people forget that these sexual predators aren't born, they're created. As a society, we need to take a step back and analyze what forces are creating these monsters. Again, I'm not feeling sympathy for these people, but what do you expect? Do you think it's going to stop? Until we analyze what's driving these people to commit these unspeakable acts, what things they're being taught, that issue isn't going to fix itself. You know, what octopus is strangling these people? Who's causing them to retreat to that isolation? Who's instilling them with that shame? Who's telling them they have dominance over a partner? As I said, I still believe in the church as an institution. I really do. I have faith that in these modern times, it can still be a positive force for good. But that's not going to happen until whoever's in charge recognizes the damage that's being caused and decides to do something about it. If you'd like to share your own experiences, please leave a comment so we can start a discussion. Keep it civil. One comment under one YouTube video isn't going to change the world, but maybe it's the start of a society that's truly free. My name is Candles. I love you all. Good night.